The American Civil War was Brexit, the birth of a nation that would not allow separation. The ideal and reality of America's founding. The United States of America was founded on the principles of freedom and equality after the War of Independence. But the reality was far more complex. Many of the early U.S. presidents were from Virginia, the political heart of the South, leading to the era being referred to as the Virginia Dynasty. Both George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were plantation owners who owned slaves. Jefferson, in particular, is known to have had children with his enslaved mistress, Sally Hemings. However, the North was not a haven of liberty either. Discrimination against black people was deeply rooted, and voter suppression, including violence, was common, effectively preventing black Americans from participating in the political process. At its core, America was a country that preached ideals of freedom and democracy while simultaneously maintaining deep economic and ideological divisions between the North and South. Southern secession and the forced unified state. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president, campaigning on a platform to stop the expansion of slavery. He gained overwhelming support in the North, but the South viewed this as the first step toward the complete abolition of slavery, which was a threat to their economic survival. The Southern economy depended on cotton plantations, which could not function without slavery. Even when Lincoln promised not to interfere with slavery in the South, the Southern leadership did not trust him. In 1861, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America, CSA. In response, Lincoln initially prioritized preserving the Union, even offering to allow slavery to continue in the South if the states returned. However, the South refused any compromise, insisting on full independence, and thus, the Civil War began. At this stage, the North's primary objective was the preservation of the Union, not the abolition of slavery. The propaganda of the war for emancipation to isolate the South. Early in the war, the South had superior military leadership, led by General Robert E. Lee, and dominated the battlefield for the first 2 years. Furthermore, France had recognized the Confederacy, raising hopes for European support. At this point, Lincoln strategically changed the war's narrative from preserving the Union to abolishing slavery. A crucial factor in this shift was Britain's position on the war. At the time, Britain was economically dependent on Southern cotton due to its booming textile industry. However, Britain also strongly opposed slavery, making open support for the Confederacy politically difficult. Most notably, British Prime Minister Lord Palmerston was a staunch abolitionist, making it unlikely for Britain to formally recognize the South. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which did not legally apply to the Confederate States but effectively framed the war as a moral struggle against slavery. This shift turned the war into a simple good versus evil conflict in the eyes of the world, preventing Britain from supporting the South. The war's objectives were not initially about emancipation, but once Lincoln realized it could be used as a diplomatic tool, he made it the official justification for the conflict. The Civil War is Brexit. This situation closely resembles Britain's withdrawal from the European Union. Brexit. Britain, the South, did not want to be bound by the EU's, Union's, rules and sought economic and political independence. The EU, the North, could not allow Britain to leave easily, fearing other nations would follow suit. British citizens, Southern citizens, we have the right to determine our own future. EU leaders, Lincoln, maintaining unity is paramount. Secession is unacceptable. Brexit saw Britain face years of prolonged negotiations and economic pressure, whereas the South's attempt to secede was crushed through military force. The U.S. federal government viewed Southern independence as a threat to the survival of the Union and chose war to prevent it. This mirrors how the EU sought to make Brexit as difficult as possible to discourage other member states from leaving. How the Civil War created a unified America. With the North's victory, the United States transformed from a loose collection of states into a centralized federal power. The South was economically devastated, and its leaders were publicly vilified. After the war, the North constructed a historical narrative that the Civil War was a righteous war for emancipation and permanently denied the right of states to secede. As a result, America evolved from a voluntary union of states into a centralized nation where secession was permanently outlawed. This process mirrors how the EU, after Brexit, sought to strengthen its unity to prevent further exits. Conclusion: the Civil War was about preventing secession. Just like Brexit, the Civil War was not simply about emancipation but a war to preserve the Union at all costs. Southern independence threatened the integrity of the United States, prompting the North to suppress it by any means necessary. Emancipation was a strategic narrative, particularly used to prevent British support for the Confederacy. After the war, America cemented itself as a unified nation, forbidding any future secession attempts. This mirrors the EU's reaction to Brexit, where the goal was to deter further exits and maintain cohesion. The Civil War was, at its core, a fight to stop secession, just as Brexit was a struggle to leave an established union. The Civil War shaped the modern United States, not as a war of liberty versus oppression, but as a battle over unity, one that declared secession intolerable, just like Brexit.